Welcome to WLNM, the web novel and manga review, hosted by Zeke Changuris.
Welcome to the WLNM Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the creatives and professionals driving our entertainment industry. Welcome to a very unique edition of the podcast, though. The guest today is novelist Azure Whitewood. We had 4 reasons to conduct the interview by email, and with the consent of Ms. Whitewood, have a substitute voice you may recognize from my wife Amanda, read the responses. So, without further ado, the WLNM Podcast interview with Azure Whitewood. So, tell me about your novels, Our House Was Summoned to Another World, and Help, My Little Sister is Disappearing.
Help, My Little Sister is Disappearing was my first light novel, and I wrote it to be a standalone volume, so not as a series, because I wanted to learn from that experience and then write a series with a strong first volume. I picked a specific message I wanted to convey with this first light novel, which I think would make the world a better place if more people took it to heart. Without spoiling what happens in Help, My Little Sister is Disappearing, the message is something like this. Let people do what they love if it isn't involving others involuntarily, and don't try to take it away from them. That will make both sides happy as negativity is purged from the world. After writing this standalone volume, I wrote the first volume of my first series called Seeker, which I created because I missed the intimate feeling of venturing into an unknown world, being chased, and having to survive to fulfill your dreams. Spice and Wolf is the work that made me pick this topic. Then I decided to start multiple series at once because I wanted to figure out what style of writing I liked most. This certainly isn't great for sales, but I wouldn't want to wonder whether a different style might have been better. So the second series I started is called Our House Was Summoned to Another World, which takes 2 things I like and combines them together, Little Sisters and Isekais. So it's a story about Oni-chan and Imoto being dragged into another world with their entire house. In contrast to the rather dark Seeker, it's much more lighthearted and rom-com. And I finally started my last series, before I finish all 3 first, called The Fruits of the Hero's Deeds in Azure City. It takes things that I hadn't tried out yet, such as present tense and non-chronological storytelling, and combines them into a story about the name-giving city's forgotten past and the main character's experiences with a bit of Greek mythology. Currently, I'm working on finishing all 3 stories.
Well, that sounds like a lot, and like you put in a lot of thought into things. So, to keep me straight, how many books is it that you've written?
I've written a total of 6 light novels so far, and I'm currently working on my 7th.
All right, I like to ask this question to a lot of writers. What got you started as a writer?
I watch a lot of anime, and I'm really into fiction, so I eventually wanted to make my own. I really like the simplicity of writing novels in comparison to something like making games, so I researched a bit, worked out a plan, and then wrote Help, My Little Sister is Disappearing to start out my career.
Did you like to write fanfic? Did you do fan fiction? I ask this question to a lot of writers because some are like, absolutely not, and then some are like, yeah, this is where they first started writing in a prompt style.
No, copyright laws are horrendous, and I don't want to invest time into something that can be buried at any point by corporations managing the rights. I like it, though. You can put your favorite characters into situations that the original author wouldn't consider.
Okay, so what inspires you to write? A lot of different things can inspire us, so what inspires you?
Anime, cute characters, being able to explore interesting situations, crafting unique stories that can't be found anywhere else, and it's a scalable way to make a living without much time investment. I take about 80 hours per novel.
Well, that seems like a very good work ethic and that you plan these things out. So in your planning, what is the favorite kind of universe you created? Do you like world building?
I really like world building. My favorite world is probably Seekers because of its mysteries and the way ancient magic is set up. As a quick summary, there are Seekers, normal people that awake as one at the age of 20. and they have an irresistible urge to find ancient magic spells, which you can think of as magic circles in certain locations, and decipher their meaning, causing insanely powerful magic to be unleashed. Naturally, because they spell disaster, pun intended, seekers live in isolation and are forced to venture into the unknown. No one knows why seekers or ancient magic spells exist, but seekers can't resist their nature, and the only hope they have is what's called the Seeker's Dream, which is the last ancient magic spell that will free them from their fate. The story follows a seeker named Roger and a demon nicknamed Lily, who is the last of her kind, as her race has been eradicated by a war that had happened 1,000 years ago and is the key to the mysteries of ancient magic.
I know that people who write, me included, create a lot of different places, and you've created very different kinds of worlds. So, do you have one that you're most proud of? Do you have a favorite child?
Probably Our House Was Summoned to Another World. It was the first romantic comedy I've ever written, and I think it turned out hilarious.
So, what is your favorite kind of character to write?
Everyone made of sugar and spice, cute characters.
Okay, my favorite question, and I say that every time because I really like to know the answers. Did you ever feel like you've written yourself into a corner? That plot that you started and you're like, oh dear, how am I going to make this work without going back and fixing everything else?
No, I plan out the story first and then write. That way I don't waste any time and I know the story's going to be good from the start.
Do you do a lot of drafts? Are you a big draft writer? I know some people who will write the entire book and then rewrite the entire book. I did that myself.
Just one. I plan the novel and then I write it. Everything else would be a waste of time. It takes me around 80 hours to write a novel.
So you seem to do a lot of drafts. How do you approach your writing? Do you do a big outline? How is it that you plan these out to be so efficient in your writing?
I first plan out everything, including the world, characters, story, style guidelines, and so on. Then I take my scene list and write each scene into novel format.
Have you ever written that something that surprises you? Like, you put it down on paper and you're like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen.
Every time I start editing, I'm surprised by how good the beginning is, since I naturally forget the details after 2 months pass. That sounds a bit arrogant in retrospect, so read it as, I write novels I like, so I naturally find them good.
I think that's a good way of believing, a good way of looking at things. So, what's your favorite kind of scene to write?
Key scenes of a volume where a high influx of details come to my mind, causing me to write extremely fast and be greatly immersed in the story.
Okay, so you've tried very different styles so far. What is your favorite genre to write in? What do you like the most?
Everything I like is easy to write, and I like most major genres, but I especially like fantasy. A pinch of fantasy always adds something nice to stories.
You have some really, really good artwork on your book covers. Do you do this yourself? Are you an artist yourself? Or do you have someone you like to work with?
I do commission an artist, but I wouldn't call it working together as a team. I initially wasn't quite sure if I could get a cover illustration that easily, so I researched a bit, looked at a lot of artists' portfolios, and then one illustration stood out to me. It was a fan art of a short anime music video called Shelter. It looked like it could have been a screenshot of an anime, and I really like this anime art style. It's simple and quick to draw, but gets the idea across, and it's an art style that works well even if different artists were to draw different covers of a series. In anime, it's the same. There are dozens of illustrators working on their respective cuts, and it still fits together nicely. With soft shading, it's a lot messier, and different artists will draw quite different illustrations. I designed the cover illustrations myself in great detail, with lots of text and reference images, and then have my artist draw it. I'm not sure if he wants to be named here, but since he's okay with mentioning him on Twitter, here's his handle, Risky Satya.
All right, I'll put that up on the screen so everyone can see it. Uh, I have. I often talk about the authors that I admire, especially some of the older ones that early influenced me, like Lucy Maud Montgomery and F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, what authors do you admire in your writing?
I've never been a person to admire anyone, really. If I like something, I like it, but I don't really take a look at the creator's name. There's a few creators that I know by name, but mostly because of exposure. I don't like or dislike a work just because it's made by a particular creator. I also don't tend to follow a creator outside of their works. I'm not much a fan of creators getting political, having arguments online, or sharing their breakfast on Twitter. I think it should be primarily about the fictional works and not so much about the person behind them. But if they're sharing writing advice, good habits, or anything that might help other people, it's a good and honorable thing to do, I think. I stand by my message in my first light novel. People can do whatever they want if they don't involve others involuntarily, but I won't necessarily like them for everything. Of course, even though I'm not a person that likes to loyally follow other creators, I'm plus one happy for every fan that likes my works or even admires me. I've received some really nice fan mails since I started writing, and I archive them in a special folder.
Well, I want to thank Azure Whitewood for answering my questions and Amanda for reading her responses. If you like what you've heard here and want to hear more, click the subscribe button. And until next time, keep reading.
This has been a WLNM podcast.